Greetings. In this one, we'll talk about aggregate supply. We had aggregate demand before, but it was a little bit different because it was from the perspective of the consumers, of those that are making the expenditures on the real GDP. Now, just in the beginning, it's important to make clear what these two axes we're looking on mean, and also I will explain how this interconnects with the curve and how it's all integrated together. It really all works in a connected manner. It doesn't work on its own. That means this vertical axis of our graph talks about the price levels in the economy, the average price levels of goods, services in the economy. Okay, from a perspective of viewing the values on the axis, P1 is a lower price level situation than P2 is a price level situation. That means P2 is a higher price level situation than P1 is. From the macroeconomic perspective looking at it, right? It's a macroeconomic graph. Now, this horizontal axis talks about real output, real GDP. It's basically the amount of goods and services produced at a certain and by this curve linked to a particular price level. But we'll talk about that in a moment. Just defining the meaning of this horizontal axis for our graph is the real output of the economy. The amount of goods, the amount of products, how much is produced. It can be also viewed from the expenditure perspective. So how much is in overall terms and the expenditure of all parties in the economy. It can be viewed from all those perspectives, but you can basically view it as the power of the entire economy, how much is going on. Okay, the higher the expenditures are in total, the higher the real GDP is, because it can be viewed as the same thing, especially with this axis. So that's a thing worth considering. Now, our aggregate supply curve, its basic law, its basic rule is it's upward sloping. There's different shapes to it. There are special cases, let's say the horizontal aggregate supply curve. There are such cases as well, but the basic one and the one that illustrates the basic tendency it has as far as shape and as far as function, it tells us that by sloping up, and this is the usual shape by the way, it can be more straight, less straight as far as its own shape, but like as far as how it is sloped, what the slope of it is, it's sloped up. Because with rising price levels, the suppliers, let's view this from the perspective of businesses, when the price levels go up, suppliers, let's say businesses, are more willing to will supply more output. Or even, let's say, with from the expenditure perspective, we can view it with rising price levels, expenditures will rise. So you see, to buy, for example, the same amount of stuff, you might have to make bigger expenditures because price levels rose. But it's not really that connected directly, because real GDP really talks about the real output, what's really going on. That means if you just still get 100 same goods, but each of them is 2 times the price, it won't really be higher Q. Okay. Then there's something called nominal GDP that you run into, and it's yet another thing. And it also talks about how basically you can have the same amount of production, the same real output, but a different money total value put onto it. So that's a whole other story. But one very big thing to realize from this is with rising prices, the real output rises. Okay, there's a tendency of suppliers. When they're getting more for each thing, they're more willing to supply. Therefore, let's say we were at this point, and this curve, it sums up all the possible points. Okay, all the possible points of aggregate supply are all points located on this curve. That means aggregate supply curve is all the points that are on it. That the curve includes as far as where it's located. All different locations on that curve, all different points on that curve. Now, let's say we were at this point. If we make a projection, which was already made, onto the y vertical axis, on the price level axis, we appear at P1. Okay? And if we draw from that same point a vertical projection down to the horizontal line, we say Q1. That means at price level P1, there's a particular real output Q1. And by the law of this aggregate supply curve, because it's sloping up, then if we go from price 1 to price 2, well, it casts a projection a little higher on it, and to the right, because it's sloping in this direction. Therefore, when our price level rises from P1 to P2, we will no longer in the P1 situation, but in a situation with a higher price level. We get to this point on the curve. It's yet another point. And now from the same point, we can cast it down on this other axis, and it casts yet another point. It projects onto Q2. And that tells us with rising price levels, we get rises in real output.